Welcome back to Track from Scratch, where we're covering the full production process of a vocal techno track. If you missed the first video covering the kick and bass, be sure to go back and watch that so you can get all caught up with where we're at the moment. In this second episode, we're going to be taking all the percussion that I had in my original idea, completely rebuilding it from the ground up over the top of the kick and bass, so then you guys can be all caught up with what I've got so far. So let's jump into the percussion. All right, so I've got the project open here, and if you missed the last episode, we just covered the kick and bass, so everything that's essentially going on in this group here, and this is what we have so far. Of course, I've still got my idea back here, but I'm going to keep rebuilding everything from the ground up using the samples that I've already selected, but I'll also explain what's going on and why I chose those samples as well, so you can go ahead and use your own samples and still have those ideas. So this is what we have so far. So nice groovy kick and bass there. And today we've got a lot to cover in the percussion group because we're going to be going over every sound that I've got in here, even though it doesn't look like that much, but we're also going to be covering a lot of the processing as well. So this is what the percussion sounds like in the idea. So got all of your main percussion elements as well as some like supplementary percussions as well that are going on down here that we'll cover towards the end of the video. So let's just start from the ground up. I'm just going to go ahead and turn all of the processing off just so I can explain all the samples first, and then we'll go through the processing. All right, so now everything's turned off. I'm going to start with rebuilding the entire thing, and maybe we'll start with the open hat, even though it's a little ways down the list. So when I'm building my hi-hats, I like to have like a snappier sample and then like a noisier, wider sample, which is what I've done here. So this top hi-hat here is nice and snappy, got a nice attack to it. We'll give it a quick listen with that soloed. So just a lot of attack and not much tail. And then we've also got our longer, noisier open hat as well that's layered above it. So this one almost has like a shaker-like quality to it, and layering those together, you get the snap of that first sample along with the nice shuffly, shakeriness, noisiness of the second sample, and then it just helps add a little bit of depth to that open hat. So what I'm going to do is copy this over here. When we're laying down our open hat, we just want to put it on the off beat. So we got a whole beat length there. So we want it to go kick, open hat on the second half. Just lay that down there. Can even reduce the grid here. So we got kick, open hat, chuck that down there. So I just copied that over. And then what we can do is highlight the entire beat length there and then Command D, and that'll copy that over. Highlight the entire beat length again, Command D. And then this is what we've got with just the snappy hi-hat. So still actually sounds pretty good with just the snappy hi-hat. And then what we'll do is we'll grab this noisy hi-hat here. Chuck that down. And then same thing again. So this is basically what I would do if I was building the track. I'd just get the main ideas down and then start fleshing the track out. So now we've got... So you can hear the... Obviously, this noisier sample is a lot louder as well, so I just wanted that to be the more prominent one. And then the snappy sample is just adding a little bit of attack to the start of the hi-hat. So really, this one's taking the main focus. And then for processing on this, so I've got these grouped together because I'm essentially treating both of these as one sound. So a little bit of EQ on each sample. So this one's just high passing and then adding a little bit of a boost at the high pass frequency. That's just to give it a little bit more presence in that sort of mid range. Then we can turn the processing on that I've got on the noisy hi-hat as well. So this is just boosting the high mids there. So just making sure that really sticks out in the mix. And then obviously there was just a little harsh frequency here, so we can solo that and you can hear what that sounds like with and without it. You can hear how without that dip, it's just really piercing the ears. So I've just dipped that there, mellowed it out a little bit, sort of evened out the frequency spectrum of that hi-hat there, and then all together with both of them. So that's nice and even without that sort of super harsh frequency going on there. And then I process them together just to bring both of the samples together nicely. So we've got another Pro Q, and this is just, again, taming that sort of harsh frequency and high passing as well, because we just don't want any low end crap that's going on with the hi-hats, because we want that reserved for the kick and bass. And I've got a drum bus as well. You'll see these sort of sprinkled throughout my projects. Drum bus, even just on the stock setting and then just moving the dry wet around a little bit, really fills out a sound. So you can hear the body of the hi-hat will be a little bit more defined. So if I unsolo that, I'll give you guys a listen without the Pro Q as well, but that's not doing a whole lot. So again, just taming that high frequency. I might have even put that dip there after adding the drum bus, just because then the drum bus might have like brightened the sound up again. So that's just like taming that high frequency, then it's going into the drum bus. So you can hear that drum bus is adding a little bit of volume, but it's more just like making the sound a little bit more sustained and a little bit more fuller in the mix. So now we can turn the Pro Q4 on here. That's just cleaning everything up a little bit, brightening up a little bit. You can easily do this with EQ8 as well. And we've got a compressor as well. This is just adding a little bit of sustain to the hi-hat. I won't really A/B this Pro Q4 because it's probably not doing heaps. And then I've just got this compressor here, just adding a little bit of attack to the hi-hat. So if we turn it off, and with it on, just adds a lot more snap to the sound. And then just overdrive enhance, just adding a little bit of brightness to the sound again. Not actually adding a whole lot, but just adding a little bit of shimmer to that hi-hat. So then what we've got so far. Next, we'll move on to the clap. So just a nice, short, snappy clap. Just those shorter, snappier sounds help the mix sound a lot tighter and a lot cleaner. What I'm going to do is just take that clap. So let's solo that real quick. Nice short sound. And then I've also just added the fade on there just to shorten it even more, because you can see it's quite a long sample. So let's take that clap. So I'm just going to highlight the 2-beat length, because we want the clap to sit on the second beat where it is. So now we can click on the start of the drop there, paste that down, and then that's going to put it on top of the second kick. And then we can keep that highlighted or highlight it again, and then go Command D, and that's going to place that every interval. So now what we've got is this. Nice short snappy clap, keeping everything nice and tight. And then for processing, we've just got a Pro Q4, taking out the low end of the clap and then just cleaning up a little bit. That would have just been a harsh frequency there. And you can kind of find those harsh frequencies sometimes by just like taking the frequency band and boosting it heaps. So you can kind of hear that like kind of sound like a little bit like nasally that I didn't want in the sample, that was sort of just like sticking out a bit too much even when that was at 0. So then we've got the dip on there. So I'll put that back there, and then just cleaning up the sound a little bit, brightening it up a little bit with this boost in the high end. So without it, and then with it, just evening it out and brightening it up a little bit. Then I've just got this clipper on here. The clipper is really just to chop off the initial attack of the clap. So you're not actually really going to hear this because it's really just sort of like affecting the very start of the sound. And basically I'm just using the Ableton saturator as a clipper. So I've got a couple of different clippers, but just for this kind of lightweight stuff, I can just rely on the Ableton saturator, chuck it on digital clip. And then what you also want to do is, I mean, you can do this, you don't have to, is turn off high quality mode. So when high quality mode's turned off, it's actually going to clip the sound. But when it's turned on, it's on oversampling. So it might actually just let a little bit of the peaks through, but that's fine for this kind of stuff as well. It'll actually help it sound a little bit better when high quality mode's on. And then what you want to do is just drive the sound so that it just starts hitting that apex there. You can see as the sound goes through, it's just hitting the apex. So that means it's starting to clip the sound. Of course, what that's also going to do is add volume to the sound. So you just want to back the output off the same amount that you're driving the sound, just because you're driving it in, and then you want to back it off just so it clips the sound without adding the volume. So that's not going to make any audible difference, but it will help with the mastering, especially when you're trying to tame peaks as you go through the process of creating the track. Then when it comes time to mastering, it'll be a lot easier to get a nice loud mix, because you're not going to have like these wild stray peaks every time the clap hits. So now what we got so far. Now we'll move on to the closed hat here. So pretty simple stuff. Sometimes I like to layer just hi-hats with shakers. Just adds like a little bit of like shuffle to the sound and like adds this nice texture underneath the original hi-hat. So let's solo that. And I'll solo this. So you can hear that's just like a very short, snappy closed hat. And then I got the shaker underneath it with like a pretty heavy fade on there. So really shorten that shaker down. And then together you get almost the same as the open hat here. You got the snappiness of the original closed hat, and then you've got the shuffliness and the noisiness of the shaker, and that works really well together. And then I've just got this in MIDI because I've got it on a rolling quarter note rhythm that also allows us to add the groove in that we had on the bass. So you want to add that onto like sort of every quarter note element or every like melody. With Ableton, it just automatically adds it onto every clip once you add some groove in. And then what I also wanted to do was add some velocity to each hit. So when you're using the Ableton sampler, the velocity is just linked to the volume of the sample. So that's just going to add to the shuffliness. So what I might do is I'll redo that completely. So I just had 2 beats. So I'll go like that. Again, Command-Shift-M to create a MIDI clip. And then with the Ableton sampler, the original pitch of the sample will be on C3. So we just want to put all of our notes on C3 to keep the original pitch of that shaker. Because of course, if you go up, it starts pitching the shaker up. And we just want it to be that original pitch. And then messing around with the velocity just kind of adds more groove. So you can hear when I've just got the velocity all the way up, it's just one long sound. But then if I start messing around with these, we can keep that, copy that over. You can hear what happens. So you get like a nice little shuffly rhythm to it. But I'll just use this one here. And then of course we've also got the groove there. So let's paste that down. So we've got that shuffly rhythm there, and we'll just drag that over. And then now what we've got is this. Hear that closed hat coming in, and then no processing on the original closed hat, but then got what's called the Haas effect on the shaker sound. So what's happening here is we'll turn this delay on, and I've got these unlinked, and then I've just switched it over to time from sync. And then what you want is a super short delay. So that's like 1.8 milliseconds, very short. And then just another delay on the right side, just a little bit above what this is. So one millisecond and 7.1 milliseconds. So I've just soloed that shaker. You can hear it without it. So adds a lot more width to that shaker because the left and right signal are slightly delayed from each other. So that helps it give it this like nice stereo width, which is what we want from that shaker. And then we've got the closed hat that stays mono. So that keeps the shaker, the closed hat nice and in the center. Then we've also got this wider element to the closed hat as well. And then I've just got kickstart to duck under the kick. So not a super heavy setting. So just adding a nice bit of rhythm in there. Then for the shaker, I've just got a shaker loop here. You can find heaps of samples. I do like to make my own, but I think I'm going to cover this in a separate video. So if you are like wanting to add a shaker in, just if you've got a Splice account, search that up. If you've got some samples, you'll definitely have some shaker loops. They'll just be like part of your percussion sample packs. So you can just chuck that in there. This is just a quarter note shaker loop. I'm just going to copy that straight over, and all we've got is this. And if your shaker loop doesn't sort of sound as like shuffly and nice as my one, what you can do is just easily chuck on an EQ8. And you'll see even with this on, you'll see the frequency spectrum of this shaker loop. It's just sitting around here. So all I would have done is just done that, and then that kind of gives it that tone. So kind of accentuating what was already there. But yeah, you just do something like that and just keep it in this very narrow frequency spectrum, and it helps it really sit nicely in the track and doesn't like overpower all of your other percussion sounds. And then again, just kickstart to duck it under the kick. So now we've got this. So we're starting to build up a nice little groove here. And then I've just got these supplementary percussion sounds. So I'll just open these ones up really quickly. By the time we finish the track, there's probably going to be a lot more of these in here. So we got this sound here, this sound, and this one here. So a couple of little different just percussion sounds just to sprinkle throughout the drops and throughout the rest of the track. So I'll just copy these straight over, and I'll just explain what's going on with these as well. So these are just samples that I've kind of frozen out from other samples. Really easy to make these kinds of sounds, and they add a lot of depth to the percussion in your track. Just help you get a bit more variety. I might actually just move this up here just because the same thing's going on with both of these. I've just fed different samples into a particular processing. So you can get this kind of stuff just by chucking some audio through a delay. I have a very specific preset called Delay Syndicate. And just heads up, you will actually need to have Ableton Suite because this is using Echo, not the standard delay, but you can achieve similar results just using the Ableton standard delay as well. I'll just grab a sample from one of my Techno folders here, even if we just chuck a hat in there. I'll go that, sure, like that. And then if we solo that, you'll hear what this sounds like. So this is just two hats randomly fed into a delay. So you get like a nice little effect there. And then all you have to do is bounce to track, bounce track in place, I should say. And now we've got this, so we can cut off that original hi-hat there, and then we'll start it there. And then we can just use this throughout the track. So instead of maybe using that, go this instead. So this is what the original sound was. So I probably just had the two hats a little bit closer together. And then instead now we've got this. And that'll work just as well. So it just adds like a nice little bit of variety to the drop. And then you can just keep sort of pasting that in the same interval over and over again. So we've got the whole 4-beat length here, so we can just copy that over, and then you start placing that throughout the entire drop. And then this is exactly the same. It's just got a clap feeding through there. So that just adds a nice little fill there. Get rid of this one. And then for processing, just on that clap, I've just added the phaser flanger for a bit of movement, and then ProQ and enhance for a bit of shaping and a bit of brightening up as well. So now we've got this. So that phaser just adds some cool movement. And then on this one, we've just got ProQ4 just to shape it as well. So probably just, high passing. And then, so similar to what was going on with the shaker loop as well, just fits it into the mix a little bit nicer. And then for this is just a quarter note rolling percussion that I've just got going for 1 beat, messed around with the velocity a little bit. And then I've done some interesting stuff with the processing as well. So the original sample was just almost like a wood type sample. I mean, it is a closed hat, but I've just shortened it a lot. Then what I've done is added disperser, so that kind of gives it this laser-like sound. You can actually create disperser in Ableton if you just use EQ3. And then what you want to do is just like duplicate it a bunch of times. So we've got a fair few in there now. So getting that like laser-like sound. So yeah, free disperser there. But let's just chuck disperser on anyway. So disperser, OTT, just to brighten the sound up a little bit. You'll hear that without it. So it just adds a lot more top end to the sound because that's how I wanted it to sound. And then just Pro Q4 for a little bit of shaping. So I've just boosted that sort of higher frequency again and then high passed it just to get rid of the low end stuff. And that's that in the mix. So now with all the percussion in, this is what we've got. And that's the percussion so far. So in the next video, we're going to be covering the synths and the vocals all in one episode. So that one shouldn't actually be too long. I will actually go through a couple of the synth presets that are going on, and I'll explain those a little bit more in depth as well, just because that episode's going to be a bit shorter and I'm going to have a bit more time to be able to go over the sound design of that. And you guys can start adding in your own little synths that you've designed yourself. So that was the percussion. Hope you guys learned a little bit, and I'll see you in the next episode.